I want you to think about the last time you felt completely safe in your own home. Like, genuinely safe. Doors locked, lights on. Nothing out of place. Just you and the familiar quiet of your space. I used to feel that way too. Every single night. Until one summer in rural Tennessee changed that forever. And I mean forever, because I still can't sleep with my back to a window, not anymore. This was about 4 years ago. I was 26, recently out of a long relationship, and I'd just rented a small house off a county road outside of Cookville. It was exactly what I needed at the time. Cheap, private, surrounded by trees. The nearest neighbor was maybe half a mile down the road. I thought I was getting peace and quiet. I thought I was healing. I had no idea what I was actually getting into. The first few weeks were perfect. I'd sit on the porch in the evenings, drink coffee, listen to the crickets. I'd go to bed early and wake up rested. It felt like a reset, like I was finally exhaling after years of holding my breath. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen that opened into the living room. Nothing special, but it was mine. I decorated it a little, put some things up on the walls, made it feel like home. The first thing I noticed was the mail. I didn't think much of it at first. I'd ordered a book online, just a paperback, nothing expensive, and when it arrived, the envelope had already been opened, carefully, not torn but sliced open along the top and then resealed with a piece of tape. I assumed it was a post office thing, customs maybe, or some kind of random inspection. I let it go. About a week later, I came home from work and found the side gate to my backyard open. I distinctly remembered closing it that morning. I checked the yard, saw nothing unusual, told myself the wind caught it. But there's no latch on the inside. You have to push it open from outside. That detail sat in the back of my mind like a splinter. Then the calls started. No voice on the other end. Just breathing. Sometimes silence. Twice a sound I can only describe as someone shifting in a chair, like someone getting comfortable. Like they had time, like they weren't in any rush. I changed my number after the 3rd call. Told myself it was a wrong number situation, a prank, kids with too much time on their hands. I was good at explaining things away back then. I started finding things slightly out of place. My kitchen chairs pulled out just a little more than I left them. A cabinet door in the bathroom that I always kept closed left open. A single dirty boot print on the welcome mat, which I only noticed because I always take my shoes off at the door and the mat was always clean. Size 12 or 13, big tread. I wore an 8. I went to the sheriff's office. I told them everything. The mail, the gate, the calls, the boot print. They were polite. They took a report. They told me it was probably nothing and to call if anything escalated. I drove home feeling more alone than I had in years. The night everything broke open was a Wednesday, late August. I remember because it had been brutally hot all week, and that night the temperature finally dropped and I opened my bedroom window for the first time in weeks. I fell asleep fast. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. I know because I looked at my phone immediately, because I heard the back door close. Not a slam, a close, the soft, deliberate click of a latch catching, like someone trying to be quiet. And in that half-awake state, I genuinely thought for a second that I'd dreamed it. I lay there completely still, heart hammering, trying to listen over the sound of my own blood in my ears. And then I heard the refrigerator open. That sound is unmistakable in a quiet house. The soft rubber seal pulling apart, the hum changing pitch, the little clink of bottles on the door shelf. Someone was in my kitchen opening my refrigerator like they owned the place. Like they'd done it before. I didn't move. I couldn't move. I was frozen in a way I'd never experienced before. Not fear exactly, but something more primal than fear. My whole body had gone into this locked, silent mode, and the only thing working properly was my brain, which was screaming at me to do something while the rest of me refused. I had my phone in my hand. I dialed 911. I whispered the address. The dispatcher kept me on the line. I could hear movement in the kitchen for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably 2. Then it stopped. Then the back door clicked again, and then silence. The deputies were there in 8 minutes. They found the back door unlocked. I always locked it, always, and boot prints in the soft dirt just beyond my porch. A half-eaten piece of leftover chicken on the counter. He'd helped himself. He'd stood in my kitchen in my house in the middle of the night and eaten my food. The casual confidence of that still makes me sick. They caught him 5 days later. He was a man in his late 40s who lived about 12 miles away. When they searched his property, they found a notebook. Detailed logs of my schedule. What time I left for work, what time I got home, what days I went grocery shopping, what route I took when I had lights on, in which rooms. He had photographs, too, taken from the tree line at the edge of my property, of my porch, of my kitchen window, of me going about my life completely unaware. He'd been watching me for at least 2 months before I'd noticed a single thing. They charged him with breaking and entering, stalking, and a few other counts I don't remember clearly because by that point I was operating on adrenaline and shock. His lawyer argued he was harmless, that he never hurt anyone, that it was just an obsession. The judge didn't see it that way, and neither do I. Because here's what I keep coming back to. That notebook, those logs, the opened mail, the boot print I almost didn't notice on a mat I almost didn't look at. He had been patient, methodical. He'd watched me long enough to know when I slept, when I was home alone, when I was vulnerable. And he'd walked into my house not in some panicked, impulsive moment, but calmly, casually, because in his mind he already knew every inch of my life. The chicken on the counter, that detail, that will never leave me. I moved out 3 weeks later. I live in a city now. Top floor apartment, security door, the works. And I know logically that this could happen anywhere. I know it could happen to anyone. I used to think I was the kind of person who didn't scare easily. I grew up in a small town in rural Ohio. Quiet roads, cornfields on 3 sides, neighbors far enough away that you couldn't see their porch lights from your window. I was used to the dark, used to silence, used to being alone. None of that ever bothered me, until it did. This was about 3 years ago. I was 26, working remotely, living alone in a rental house just outside of Zanesville. Single-story wood paneling, old windows that rattled when trucks went by on the highway half a mile away. Nothing special, nothing scary. Just a house. The first thing I noticed was my trash. I know that sounds stupid, but hear me out. I had a routine. Every Tuesday night I'd drag the bins to the end of the driveway. Wednesday morning the truck would come and I'd drag them back. Simple, boring, normal. One Wednesday I brought the bins back in and noticed the lid on the larger one was slightly open. I figured wind, or maybe the truck guys had just been careless. I didn't think about it again. But then it happened again the following week, and the week after that, and this time when I looked inside, the bags were slightly shifted, like something had been pushed down or moved aside. Animals, I told myself. Raccoons, maybe. Probably a dog from somewhere. I set up my old phone out there, propped it against the fence post using a rubber band and a stack of patio pavers. Not a security camera, just my old cracked Samsung running a motion detection app I'd downloaded for free. I wasn't even that serious about it. More curious than anything. I forgot about it for 4 days. When I finally checked the footage, most of it was wind triggering the sensor. Branches, a cat at one point, normal stuff. But then I scrubbed forward to a Tuesday night around 1:40 in the morning, and I stopped scrolling. A man was standing at the end of my driveway. He wasn't going through the trash, he wasn't walking past. He was just standing there facing the house. Still. The footage was grainy and dark, and the motion sensor light hadn't triggered because he was just far enough from it. But I could make out the shape of him clearly. Average height, dark jacket, hands at his sides. He stood there for 11 minutes. Then he walked back down the road and disappeared into the dark. I sat with that video open on my laptop for a long time. My first thought was that it was a neighbor, maybe someone out for a late walk who stopped to rest. People do weird things at weird hours. I tried to make it normal, I really did. But something about the stillness of it wouldn't let me go. 11 minutes is a long time to just stand somewhere. 11 minutes facing a house at 1:40 in the morning and then walking away without ever approaching, without ever looking at anything else. I called the non-emergency police line the next morning. They sent a deputy out who walked the perimeter of the property, looked at the phone footage, and told me it was likely someone who'd had car trouble or was walking home from somewhere. He said unless the person came onto my property or threatened me, there wasn't much they could do. He told me to call back if it happened again. It happened again. Same night of the week, Tuesday, 1:52 a.m. this time. Same spot at the end of the driveway. But this time he was closer. Not on my property, not past the property line, but closer than before. Close enough that the motion sensor light caught the edge of him. And in that washed-out yellow light, I could see that he was looking directly at the camera. He knew it was there. I felt something drop in my stomach when I realized that, because it meant he'd been watching long enough, carefully enough to notice a cracked old phone zip-tied to a fence post, and instead of leaving, instead of staying away, he came back. He just adjusted. I stopped sleeping well after that. I'd lie in bed and listen to the house in a way I never had before. Every creak of the wood floor felt loaded. Every time the heat kicked on and the vents ticked, I'd open my eyes. I started leaving more lights on. I moved my bedroom to the interior room that had no windows facing outside. I told my sister. She wanted me to move in with her immediately. I told her I was fine. I wasn't fine, but I didn't want to admit that a man standing at the end of my driveway had completely dismantled the way I felt inside my own home. 2 weeks passed with nothing. I started to breathe again. Started to think maybe he'd moved on, lost interest, found somewhere else to be strange and frightening. I even started sleeping with the lights off again. Then I found the mark. It was on the wooden post at the edge of my property. A small horizontal cut like something had been scraped into the wood with a key or a knife. Deliberate, clean, about chest height. I wouldn't have noticed it except I was out there one evening checking the garden hose connection, and the low sunlight caught it at just the right angle. I stood there staring at it for a long time. It wasn't there before I knew every inch of that fence line. I used to lean against that post when I talked on the phone. That mark was new and it had been put there intentionally, and that meant he had walked onto my property at some point in the daylight or close to it, and I had not seen him and had not known. I called the police again. She took it more seriously. She filed an official report, photographed the mark, took a copy of the camera footage. She said they'd increase patrols on my road. She also very quietly told me I should consider not being in that house alone at night until they figured out who this was. I left that same evening, stayed with my sister for 2.5 weeks. When I came back with my brother-in-law to collect more of my things, there was a second mark on the post. Same type of cut, slightly lower than the first. I never went back to live there. The police did follow up. They identified a man about 4 miles away who had a history of what they called fixation behavior. Not violence, not breaking and entering, but a documented pattern of watching, monitoring, marking, like he was cataloging something, cataloging people. The deputy told me they'd spoken with him and that he had not technically broken any laws up to that point. She used the word yet, and then seemed to wish she hadn't. I don't know if he's still doing it. I don't know if he moved on to someone else or if he's still standing at the end of some road at 2 in the morning, face turned toward a lit window, patient as anything. What I know is this: the thing that scared me wasn't the darkness or the isolation or any of the things I'd grown up comfortable with. It was the realization that someone had turned their quiet, sustained attention toward me, toward my house, my schedule, my fence post, and I had no idea, none. I went to sleep every night thinking I was alone, and I wasn't. I think about that a lot. I think about how many people are out there right now checking their locks, assuming their routines are private, assuming that ordinary life means unobserved life. I'm not sure that's true anymore. I'm not sure it ever was. I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I grew up in rural Tennessee, the kind of place where you learn pretty young that the dark is just the dark. That strange sounds at night are usually just animals or old pipes, and that your imagination is almost always the loudest thing in the room. I believed that for 31 years. I don't believe it anymore. This happened 2 years ago in November at the house I was renting outside of Knoxville. It was a 1-story place on about 3 acres of land, surrounded mostly by tree line and a gravel driveway that ran almost a 1/4 mile from the road to the front door. I loved that isolation when I first moved in. No neighbors close enough to hear your business, no traffic noise, just quiet. I used to think that quiet was peaceful. It isn't always. My wife at the time, Camilla Juck, had gone to visit her sister in Nashville for the weekend. I had taken Friday off work and was looking forward to 3 days alone. Football, bad food, nothing on my schedule. I remember being in genuinely good spirits that evening. I made a bowl of chili and sat on the couch around 7 o'clock. The wind was picking up outside. You could hear it moving through the trees in these low rolling waves. It was the kind of night that feels designed for staying in. Around 9, I got up to take the trash out to the side of the house. The motion light above the garage door clicked on the second I stepped outside, like it always did. I walked the bag over to the can, dropped it in, and that's when I noticed it. The side door to the garage, the one that leads from inside the garage out to the yard, was slightly open. Not wide open, maybe 4 or 5 inches, just enough to notice. I stood there for a second. I was pretty sure I hadn't been in the garage that day. I walked over, pushed it shut, and made sure the latch caught. I told myself the wind had probably pushed it open. Old door, old frame. It happened sometimes. I went back inside and didn't think much of it. That was my first mistake. By 10:30, I went to bed. I left the hallway light on. I'm not even sure why. Something in me just didn't want total darkness that night. I woke up at 2:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone the second my eyes opened. I lay there in bed completely still, the way you do when something pulls you out of sleep and your body knows to be quiet before your brain catches up. I didn't hear anything. The house was silent, but I was wide awake, heart already going faster than it should have been for a man just lying in his own bed. And then I heard it. From the other end of the house, a single, slow creak. The kind that comes from someone shifting their weight on an old floor. Not the house settling. I'd lived there long enough to know the difference. This was deliberate, weighted, human. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. Then I reached down beside the bed and grabbed the baseball bat I keep there, a habit from living alone that I'd never actually needed until that moment. I sat up slowly. The hallway light was still on, throwing a thin yellow strip under my bedroom door. I got up and I opened that door. The hallway was empty. I stood at the threshold and listened, and the house was dead quiet again. I went room by room. Bathroom, empty. Spare bedroom, empty. I got to the living room and turned on every light I could reach. Nothing. No one. The front door was locked. The windows were all closed and latched. Then I went to the kitchen and I saw it. The door that connects the kitchen to the garage. I always kept that door locked from the inside with a simple thumb-turn deadbolt. That bolt was turned, unlocked. I know for a fact I didn't unlock it. I hadn't been in the garage in 2 days. I stood there staring at that unlocked bolt and my entire body went cold. Because I understood suddenly with a clarity that felt almost physical, that the open side door I had found earlier that night wasn't the wind. Someone had come in through the garage, and at some point that someone had been standing right here on the other side of this door, turning this bolt. I called 911. I stood in the middle of that kitchen with the bat in my hand, and I didn't move until I heard the gravel popping under the tires of the sheriff's cruiser coming up my driveway. They searched the property for over an hour. 2 deputies, flashlights cutting through every corner of the yard and the tree line. They found the side garage door exactly as I'd latched it, but just inside, on the garage floor near an old utility shelf, there was a sleeping bag. Rolled up tight, shoved behind a stack of plastic storage totes. Someone had been living in my garage. For how long, I still don't know. The deputies couldn't tell me. They dusted for prints, filed a report, told me to change my locks and put a hasp on the garage door. They never identified who it was, but here's the thing that stays with me. The thing I can't shake no matter how much time passes. That sleeping bag was set up facing the interior door. The one that connected to my kitchen, to my house. Whoever was in there wasn't just trying to stay warm or stay hidden. They had positioned themselves to watch that door. To wait. For what? I still don't know. I moved out 2 weeks later. Camilla and I broke the lease, packed everything we could into a truck, and left. The landlord was understanding. I think part of him already knew that house had a history I hadn't been told about. I live in the city now. Neighbors on both sides, a well-lit street, people always around. I used to miss that isolation. The quiet, the land, the feeling of having space that was just yours. I don't miss it anymore, because I learned something that November that I wish I could unlearn. That isolation isn't just yours. Sometimes it belongs to someone else too, and they've been there a lot longer than you have. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to uproot my entire life over a feeling. But that's exactly what I did. And if you'd been through what I went through, you'd understand. It started in the summer of 2019. I just moved into a rental house in a small town outside of Knoxville. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a big backyard, long gravel driveway that curved through a patch of old oak trees before you even reached the road. My nearest neighbor was about a quarter-mile away. I loved it. At least I loved it at first. I was working remotely at the time doing data entry for a logistics company, which meant I spent most of my days alone at my kitchen table with a laptop and a cold cup of coffee. It was quiet, peaceful even. The kind of place where you leave your windows open in the evening and listen to crickets until you fall asleep. That's the life I thought I was getting. The first thing I noticed, and I almost didn't notice it at all, was my trash. I'd put 2 bags out by the side of the house on a Tuesday night, waiting for Wednesday morning pickup. When I came outside the next day, the bags were there, the truck had come and gone, but one of the bins had been moved. Not knocked over by wind, not tipped by an animal. Moved, deliberately repositioned about 6 feet from where I'd left it, facing a different direction. I stood there staring at it for a full minute before I told myself I was being ridiculous and went back inside. But that small, strange detail lodged itself somewhere in the back of my mind. And it didn't leave. 2 weeks later, I came home from a grocery run and noticed the side gate to my backyard was unlatched. I always latched it, always. Not because I had a dog or kids to worry about, just habit. I walked through the yard, checked around the perimeter, didn't see anything out of place. Told myself the wind had caught it. Latched it again and went inside. Then came the photographs. I had a habit of leaving my phone on the kitchen windowsill while I cooked dinner. The window faced the backyard and the tree line beyond it. One evening I picked up my phone and noticed the camera app was open. I hadn't opened it. I scrolled through my recent photos and found 3 pictures that I had not taken. They were blurry, slightly off-angle, clearly accidental, the kind of thing that happens when a phone gets bumped. But the images themselves made my stomach drop. They were of my backyard, through my own kitchen window, taken from inside my house, I stood completely still for I don't know how long. My brain was trying to rationalize it, running through every possible innocent explanation. Did I take them without realizing? Was it some kind of app glitch? I checked the timestamps. They were taken at 2:14 in the afternoon on a Thursday. I had been home. I had been sitting at that kitchen table not 10 feet from that window for most of that day. I called a friend. She told me to call the police. I told her I probably just bumped the phone by accident and laughed it off. But I didn't laugh when I hung up. I checked every door, every window, every lock. Nothing was broken, nothing was forced. The house was exactly as I'd left it. That was the part that scared me most. I started paying attention to everything after that. The position of things I'd left on counters. Whether the chairs at my kitchen table were exactly as I'd pushed them in. I know how that sounds. I know. But when something shifts in you, when that primal part of your brain decides something is wrong, it doesn't just switch off because you can't find proof. I started finding small things. A cabinet in my laundry room that I never opened was open by an inch. A drawer in the spare bedroom, a room I barely used, was slightly ajar. My back door deadbolt, which I always turned clockwise to lock, was locked in the counterclockwise position one morning when I came downstairs. You might think you're turning it one way and actually turning it the other. I thought that too. So I put a small piece of clear tape across the door frame. Low, near the bottom. Something no one would notice. It was broken 4 days later. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with every light in the house on and a kitchen knife on the cushion next to me, replaying every moment in my head. Someone had a key, or knew how to get in without one. And they weren't stealing anything. They weren't leaving anything behind. They were just coming in, moving things by inches, just enough to exist in my space without me being able to prove it. I went to the police station in person the next morning. I brought photos. I brought the timestamps from my camera roll. I explained the tape, the locks, the bin, all of it. The officer I spoke to was polite. He took notes. He told me they'd increase patrols in my area. He asked if I had any disputes with neighbors. I said no. He said he'd look into it. I drove back home feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. I set up a cheap security camera that week. Pointed it at the back door from the inside. I didn't tell anyone I'd done it. 3 nights later, I woke up at 4 in the morning for no particular reason and checked the app on my phone. The feed was live. The back door was closed, locked, exactly as I'd left it. But the camera had been rotated just slightly, maybe 15 degrees. Enough that it was no longer pointing at the door. It was pointing at the wall. I was out of that house by noon. I didn't pack everything. I loaded my car with what mattered. My laptop, my documents, a bag of clothes, and I drove to my sister's place in Nashville without stopping once. I cried for about an hour somewhere on I-40, not out of sadness, but out of the kind of fear that has nowhere left to go. The landlord later told me when I forfeited my deposit and broke the lease that the previous tenant had also left suddenly, midway through her lease. He said she'd complained about feeling uncomfortable. He'd assumed it was just nerves living alone out there. He hadn't asked many questions. I asked him who else had a key to the property. He said just him, and whoever the previous tenant had given one to. I don't live alone anymore. I haven't since. And before you think this story ends with some dramatic revelation, A name, an arrest, an explanation. It doesn't. Because whoever it was, whatever they wanted, they were never caught. The investigation, if you can call it that, went cold before it ever got warm. What haunts me isn't the idea that someone was watching me. It's that they were so careful, so deliberate. They weren't after anything I could identify. They just wanted to be there, in my space, around my things, in my life while I was living it, complete.